how to get great tone from anywhere. This is IkeGuitar, and this is a philosophy on tone. So it's my hope in this video today to give you guys a philosophy on how to find good tone anywhere. And hopefully this will give you guys a good toolkit to build your own tones and hopefully give you guys better results with tones in the future. When you're a guitar player, tone's a pretty big deal, especially when you're about to go and play live gigs. And so when I think about tone, I think about how can I get the best tone I can with what I've got. And not all tools are going to be the same. Not all pedals or amps are going to be the same. But let's define what makes a good tone, because I feel like a lot of guitarists out there, especially ones on the internet, they say, oh man, this pedal sounds amazing, but they never really tell you why. Or they talk about how this artist has really great tone, but they don't give you any building blocks or points of performance for you guys to emulate on your own here. So it's my hope to you guys today that this kind of clears the air on what makes a good tone versus what makes a bad tone. And that's a pretty big delineation, because you never hear on the internet, this pedal sounds really bad, or you never really hear about this tone sounds bad. All you hear about are these great tones. We're going to really dive into how you get good tone and what's the philosophy or the building blocks behind finding good tone wherever you are for any style of music that you play. Obviously, we know that tone is the sound you get when you play your guitar through an amp. For a guitarist, that's typically through a stomp box as well, or multiple stomp boxes. But typically, tone is simply an addition of an electric guitar to an amplifier. And there are some tweaks that you can take here and there to make that tone sound essentially better or worse. I would say when it comes to good tone or bad tone, there really is no... That's the binary you have to define your tone as. Typically, I don't think there's a middle ground when it comes to actual tonal sounds. There's a saying in live sound, and I love this saying: if it sounds good, it's good. And if it sounds bad, it is bad. Okay? So let's not make this, I'm so close to getting the perfect tone. No, if your tone sounds good, it sounds good. Okay? And if your tone sounds bad, it sounds bad. And if your tone sounds bad, what makes it sound bad? What could make it sound good? Is it the reverb? Is it the delay? Is it the way you've EQ'd? Those things that you ask yourself when defining your tone helps you find that ultimate good tone. Getting into live sound, you kind of get an idea for what sounds good and what doesn't sound good, especially in the context of a mix situation. And that's something to keep in mind, because when we talk about someone's good tone or someone's not so good tone, we're usually talking about it in the context of a performance or a production that they've made. So when I talk about the Edge and I say his tone is amazing or his tone is good, I'm not thinking about the Edge playing in my basement or sitting right next to me playing guitar for me in a private venue. I'm thinking about the concerts I go to, the albums I listen to. The Edge sounds good because of the things that he makes in the studio, mainly. And that's interesting because a lot of the times we don't have quality production or quality mixing tools in our day-to-day guitar playing or in our venues that we go to play at, like our bars or our dives or wherever else. And so we really hurt ourselves when we call someone's tone good and we're only giving them the context of a professionally produced record, professionally mastered, so to speak. So when I talk about good tone here, I talk about tone that will sound good just about anywhere. And there's ways to fit that tone specifically in certain areas. We'll go through that overall. Now, good tone typically falls along the range of this category. If it fits well in a mix, or if you can hear every note articulate and you can hear the attack of your pick, typically a tone is good. And good is like the vast majority of all guitar work out there. There isn't a lot of tone that's great. What you find in great tone are the professionally produced mix tracks and these records of these really well-known guitar players. And so the difference between a good tone and a great tone is really only about 10%. The 10% just happens to be, incredible playing chops and the best equipment and the best mixing and mastering. But good tone is available for everybody. And so when you're talking about the idea of good tone, the good tone is the ability to hear your guitar in a mix, but it isn't overpowering it. Now, I'm going to separate and break down good tone just a second here. Before we do that, let's break down bad tone a little bit more. Now, bad tone is exactly what it sounds like. Bad tone is simply tone that does not sound pleasing to your ears, either in a contextual mix situation or a live situation, or when you're playing in your practice room for friends. And bad tone typically sounds it's either too loud or it pierces too much, it's too whiny, there's too much low end, too much woof and whatnot. And so bad tone is a whole lot easier to find when we've defined it. And bad tone is going to vary for a lot of you guys, but style is very much a part of what creates bad tone. When we're talking about getting these sounds or another, it all depends on the context that they're being played in. So for example, if I was playing, a jazz tone in a metal band, you wouldn't think that that jazz tone was good tone, right? You wouldn't think I would sound good. But according to a jazz player, that's a great sounding tone. It's just that in the current context, that tone is bad. So not only is bad and good tone, objectively defined, but it's also contextual, okay? So one good tone may not fit where another tone may be perfect for it. So when talking about breaking down the philosophy of a good tone, it's important to get your standards right. So I'm going to talk about how I break down tone in the guitar world, and we'll start with the early rockers, and we'll move on toward more modern. So tone falls into these two categories. Tone is either, guitar based, like it's based on the actual guitar that you're playing. It sounds like your guitar. It embodies the skill of the player. You can hear everything inside it. Or your tone's going to be more the sound of an amplifier. So things like the Marshall rectifier or the JCM 200 that they use in heavy rock music. Although Eddie Van Halen was a great guitar player, his tone was not just the combination of his playing, but it was that amplifier. And that amp was a dominant part of that sound in the early 80s to late 80s for a lot of metal rockers. Whereas, maybe a country artist or a jazz player, you really heard the guitar he was playing. Maybe it was Wes Montgomery playing his ES335 through a Fender amp. Although the Fender amp accentuated that sound, Fender amps are pretty mellow. They don't have a lot of characteristics, which is why pedals go so well with Fender amps. But what you heard was Wes Montgomery's playing and his 335, that semi-hollow, mahogany, warm guitar is all part of that tone. So when I say tone, generally think about tone as either working in favor of a guitar and its player or working in favor of an amp and its player. Now, every week for the coming weeks, I'm going to be developing some basic fundamentals of how to recreate tone. But I hope this philosophy on tone kind of helps you move your mind past the actual physical sounds and into the more broader contextual meaning of what makes good tone good tone. What I hope to do is every week we're going to go through a tone. This week will just be philosophy, but next week we'll do, country or jazz, or we'll do metal, or we'll do modern rock, or we'll do any other kind of tonal variation. I'm going to show you guys the building blocks on how you make those kinds of tones sound good. And I'll give you guys some helpful pointers on how guitarists often make bad tone decisions as well. But it's those kinds of things, those, in the moment buying mistakes, or even those conceptual mistakes that you guys make when it comes to building great tone. I'll help you guys to stay away from those things. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video on the philosophy of good and bad tone. If you liked it, please consider subscribing. I'm going to be making videos 3 times a week. You don't want to miss a single episode. And be sure to come back next week for our next lesson on our first tonal video. We're probably going to tackle something like country or jazz. I haven't really decided yet, but let me know in the comments below what kind of tones you want to hear. And hopefully it'll give you guys some good building blocks to making great sounds on your own time. With that, guys, we'll see you next time. Enjoy your day and go make some good sounds. What can go wrong?